Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, where we're covering the 2016 Reagan National Defense Forum. Our coverage here is sponsored by Raytheon, and we have with us Admiral Paul Zukunft, who's the Commandant of the United States Coast Guard. Sir, great to see you again.
Vago, it's great to see you here as well. What a great event this has been.
It's absolutely fantastic. Why was this important for you to come to this event?
Well, I sit with all the service chiefs, and we've been working for the last year on the national military strategy to deliver that to the next administration. And we heard that today. We heard about China, we heard about Russia, we heard about Iran, we heard about North Korea, we heard about violent extremism. And that was validated. It was validated with members of Congress, members of industry. And I look at Coast Guard, and this is very expeditionary in nature. And so as DOD is being pulled off to all four corners of the world, where are they not? And you don't hear anything about the Western Hemisphere. You don't hear anything about the Arctic, which is just as vital to the homeland as these other 4+1 areas are as well. And so that's where the Coast Guard's laying its chips down as DOD is being pulled elsewhere.
Obviously, I've noticed that there's a presidential transition that's underway. Obviously, the landing teams have been arriving. They've also arrived at the Department of Homeland Security, but also at the Coast Guard. Tell us a little bit about what the new team is telling you, and what are some of the things that you're telling the new team?
Well, the first thing I tell them is this is continuity for the United States Coast Guard. We've been around for 226 years. We are not politically appointed, so we will have the same team. On January 19th, it'll be the same team in the Coast Guard on the 21st of January as well. We are forward deployed. We have strategy driving budget. This Congress has been very good to the Coast Guard in our appropriation in 2016. I remain optimistic that we will be just as successful in 17, because we also have a clean financial audit opinion. So on top of getting the best value on our acquisition, I can account for what's in the checkbook as well. So what I tell the landing team is the next secretary, the next president can sleep well knowing that the Coast Guard has got the watch on the homeland.
What are some of the priorities, though, that that have to carry forward in your estimation for the future of the service?
I think one of the biggest challenges we have, and it's a very complex one, is we talk about immigration reform. It reminds me when I was at the Meridian Summit not that long ago in Washington, D.C., and Gallup had polled 132 nations. And they asked the populace of these nations, if there's anywhere in the world that you could live right now, where would you want to live? And the number one answer is the United States of America. So there's a huge push that remains of coming to the United States, and maybe it's by illegal means. So we have challenges with illegal migration. It's showing up on our southwest border. The push factors I'm seeing in this part of the world is violent crime, and mostly in Central America. The three countries where we see the highest flow rates right now are Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. The violence is what's driving these people out, and what's driving the violence is the bulk drugs that arrive in those countries but ultimately destined for the United States. So how do I get to the root cause of this people voting with their feet? And it's getting after this drug flow where it's most vulnerable, and it's actually on the water.
Is there, the president-elect ran, one of his campaign themes was build a wall on the Mexican border. If you build an impregnable wall on the Mexican border, doesn't that mean that some folks are now going to try to get into the United States by sea?
Well, the only place we can physically build a wall is on where we have property rights on our southwest border. The Coast Guard has, if you want to call them property rights, maritime rights to enter the territorial seas of over 40 other nations and enforce U.S. law in those waters with the approval of over 40 signatory nations to these treaties. So as we look at maritime borders, we can push those borders right to the shorelines of other countries that may pose a threat to the United States. It could be drugs, could be fish, or it could be a weapon of mass destruction. So we have got a bushel basket of authorities, maybe not a bushel basket of capability, but certainly as we zero in with intelligence, where do we need to best apply those authorities? We can apply that on those maritime borders.
Do you think, though, that it will raise the amount of folks who are trying to come in through sea that's going to increase your workload?
Well, clearly, this is a squeeze the balloon theory. So if you make it difficult to cross the land border, you go around, and we have a 95,000-mile maritime border around our nation as well, much more than we have a land border, especially our land border to the south.
Let me ask you about budgets. Obviously, it looks like the defense budget's going to be going up. The president-elect has made it clear that he wants to dissolve the Budget Control Act, push some more money to the Pentagon. What do you think that's going to mean for the Department of Homeland Security, but also specifically for the United States Coast Guard? Do you see a budget increase in your future?
I'm a little wary if we're talking about building a wall. And if building a wall becomes the number one priority, does that become the number one funding appropriation for the Department of Homeland Security? And then where would those appropriation dollars come from, absent a plus-up to the Department of Homeland Security? So if there's a plus-up to the department, so it doesn't become at the expense of the other components of DHS, we can work within that. And certainly we did when part of this wall has been built to date as well. But make no mistake, we have got to modernize the force that we have today. It cannot be more relevant. We just launched our newest national security cutter. They were at the International Sea Power Symposium, the Hamilton. They left Newport, Rhode Island. They're off the coast of the Galapagos right now. They've got over 40 detainees on board, more than enough cocaine to pay for nearly 2 of these national security cutters. So in terms of intelligence driving operations, deploying these assets where the threats are known, using these authorities are having a tremendous return on investment for us.
In the event that there is more budget dollars, obviously the priority are the 6 new icebreakers that you need, the 3 heavies and the 3 medium icebreakers. But if you had a little bit more money and it covers the icebreakers, are more national security cutters a priority?
We have to really look at our ability to sustain these new assets. And so I'm always reluctant to take on more than I can digest. And so the out-year cost of sustaining these new platforms, it's going to be more. The reason it's more, they're smaller crews. The ships they replace had large crews, and they were the wrench turners. We have mostly operators on these platforms now, and we provide contractors to do that maintenance. It's more expensive up front, but in the long term it's cheaper because I don't have to pay a contractor a military retirement and health care for life. So we need to get those near-term costs, those annualized costs, under control as well. I'm very optimistic about our acquisition budget. It doubled this last year, and it pretends to double again in 2017. We need to be able to repeat this process, but at the same time, we're stuck in the starting block under a continuing resolution. This is about our 18th CR that we've been through in the last 5 or 6 years. So to get that funding, a full appropriation up front, so we can move out on some of these new starts is absolutely critical to us as well.
I want to ask something that is near and dear to a Coast Guardsman's heart, but the regular public doesn't know about it, which is aids to navigation. You guys manage both the inland and the offshore, all of the aids to navigation. It's an enormous national infrastructure that's vital to the nation's sea trade, but also all of the inland buoy tenders and all the ships that go to support those aids to navigation. A lot of the focus every time goes to the icebreaker or to the national security cutter or the offshore patrol cutter. Is there enough investment, and I say this speaking as a boater, that are going into the aids to navigation, some of which are very dated, even when you're out on the water? There's some incredible things you guys are doing, but sometimes you see stuff and you're like, boy, I'm sure, that could use a little bit of work. Do you think that there's enough focus on that and there's enough national attention to something that is so integral to the nation's economic livelihood?
Vago, I think you have a listening device in my meetings with my senior leadership team. We just met 2 weeks ago. We're putting out the requirements of recapitalizing our inland buoy tender fleet. Not a huge expense, but we have some of these buoy tenders right now that are approaching 70 years of service. They're beyond their prime time. They have asbestos, they have lead paint in them, and so there's some big quality of life concerns, and some can't accommodate a mixed gender crew. But $4.5 trillion of commerce go through our waterways every year. And it reminds me of one of our junior-most seamen. She was right out of basic training on one of these inland river tenders. And what they do is they push into a sandbank. They go in with chainsaws to clear brush so you can see these visual aids. There's typically fire ants, snakes, hornets, and the like. And I said, when you joined the Coast Guard, is this what you thought you were going to do? And she didn't even pause. She said, well, Commandant, if I don't do my job and make sure that aid to navigation is visual, over $1 trillion of commerce will not go down. This is the lower Mississippi River, will not make it to its destination. She is that NASA janitor, but she understands the value of the work that she does to make sure that these aids are watching properly.
Now that is a strategic Coast Guardsman right there. Sir, thanks very much. It's always a treat.
Vago, likewise. Great to see you again.
Good seeing you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much.